Hello and welcome back to the Rope Access and Climbing Podcast. I'm your host, Mikey Stevenson, and today I'm sitting down with a sales representative from Petzl, North America, Ian Neve. If this is your first time here, please make sure to subscribe and follow us wherever you get your podcasts. So stay tuned. Step into your harness and get ready for a podcast about the vertical world. All right. Well, thank you very much for tuning into today's episode. I am joined here with Ian. So let's dive into it. Ian, do you mind giving us a little bit of an intro, who you are, where you come from?
Yeah, thanks, Mikey. I appreciate the opportunity to be here and talk to your listeners and viewers. So my name's Ian Neve, and formally at the moment, I am the Eastern Canadian professional rep for Petzl. I look after Manitoba all the way out to Newfoundland and including Quebec. I've got a pretty varied background, certainly in the vertical realm. So originally as a tree climber, certified with the International Society of Arboriculture, and then moved on from there to the fire service, where I'm still currently a trainer and work on a heavy rescue truck at one of the departments in the Big 12 around the Golden Horseshoe area of Toronto. I also have a level 1 IRATA background and have worked with various groups like the Canadian Ski Patrol locally here for lift evacuations and tower work, and have also had the opportunity to be up on some wind turbines and some pretty interesting exposures to crane rescue, pretty much anything that you might want to call 911 for, or that realm that you're working in. Also through the fire service, a ice water rescue instructor, confined space instructor as well. So.
Excellent. So you've been around and been exposed to a lot of this vertical world that we're talking about here.
Absolutely, yeah.
Excellent. All right. So to all the viewers and listeners here today, we are talking, like I said, to Ian, a representative from Petzl, speaking on behalf of himself and his experience. And today we're going to be diving into both the fire service and the arborist industry a little bit, talking about some gear, talking about, what the future looks like here in Canada to do with CSA and Petzl as a manufacturer. So that's what to expect on this episode. All right, so let's dive in here. So can you explain a little bit more about your experience as it pertains to the fire service and the arborist industry? You are based in Ontario, Canada. So is there anything specific that, is different in Ontario compared to other provinces?
Well, let's talk about arboriculture first.
Okay.
Most definitely across Canada, that we've got each province with their own Ministry of Labor or regulators, if you will, that are looking out for the health and safety of workers in those fields, versus the fire service, which definitely Ministry of Labor, as an example, in Ontario, look after the health and safety of the firefighter. That we really follow more of the NFPA guidelines. So that's a much bigger and broader representation of health and safety within the fire service. Very regulated as well. And one thing I will say is the arborists enjoy a certain amount of freedom and latitude. And I would say from Petzl's perspective, they're probably one of our most creative groups of workers that we work with and develop gear for. In IRATA, of course, you've got the IRATA or SPRAT, you've got those guidelines that you must follow. In the NFPA world, we've got guidelines we must follow. Definitely in terms of occupational health and safety within the construction and industrial world, some very strict guidelines we must follow. And while the arborists have in Ontario and Quebec particularly, they have some guidelines which fall under the heading of Ministry of Labor, that they're pretty not free to do whatever they want. They've obviously got to follow work at height guidelines, but they are working in a very organic environment. So they don't have a set rule that they must follow other than being tied off properly, observing chainsaw regulations, rigging regulations, work on the ground regulations, that kind of thing. But climbing in the tree, you're got a lot of flexibility there.
Yeah, and that really is beneficial for the worker that's up there doing the work. Obviously, from an industrial purpose standpoint that I have, sometimes you feel restricted by the amount of rules that you have to follow. Obviously, the rules are there for a reason. I'm not saying don't follow the rules. Please do follow the rules. They're there for a reason. But, sometimes you do feel restricted. So it's good to see that, the arborist industry is still, allowing that ability of that amount of flexibility to, perform their task in a safe, controlled fashion still.
Yeah, absolutely. And I should just point out as well that I'm coming at you from a couple of different directions today. So having worked in most of these fields, I feel comfortable that I can talk the talk and walk the walk. But I also want to be really clear that a lot of the things I'm going to talk about are my opinions and observations just from years in the field. Mm-hmm. Now, obviously, as a representative of Petzl, that I'll be coming with views that are very Petzl oriented, our philosophies on work and our equipment as well. But I'll let you know definitely when I'm heading off into an opinion-based answer as compared to something that's very rigid like an NFPA, CSA, ANSI guideline, something along those lines.
Sounds good. Now, you did mention something about the certification to be an arborist. Now, unfortunately, I haven't had the opportunity to speak to any arborists here on my channel yet. So if anyone's listening and wants to chime in as a certified arborist, contact me. You know how to do that. But, you are or were a certified arborist. Now, do you mind kind of diving into that aspect a little bit? The organization, how you maintain certification?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm a big one for cliches. And there's that old cliche, give a man enough rope, he'll hang himself. And that's actually my introduction into the arborist world. So for years and years, we have had a family-run and operated landscaping company, and a number of my landscape customers asked if I could look after their trees. So realizing I was a little short on equipment and not everything could be pruned with a pole saw, I went to my local arborist supply store and said, hey, I'm going to need a harness and I'm going to need a rope and I'm going to need some of those things that you put on your legs and you poke them in the side of the tree. And fortunately, the sales rep did me a huge service and he said, do you have any knowledge of what this gear's for? And I said, no, but I can figure it out. And he said, I'm not selling it to you because I think you could do yourself a lot of harm. He said, but here's where I would recommend go to the local college. They've got a great program in tree climbing. And I did that. I went and took a tree climbing program, followed that up with an urban forestry program and diploma as well. And then while I was in that, realized there was this great organization called the International Society of Arboriculture, or the ISA, and decided that I get involved there, and they have a certification program. It's changed a little bit now from when I did it. Not only is there certified arborist, but there's certified tree climber. And so you have to challenge an exam. It's a very difficult exam, and I highly recommend studying for it. It's the kind of thing as well that you're going to live to a very high standard once you take this. And not only is it based on tree climbing, but it's also based on arboriculture and horticulture. So it's a real taste of the entire field of arboriculture. Tree climbing and pruning is just one element of that. You have to maintain your certification every 3 years, much like most certifications out there. And you can get continuing education credits by, once upon a time, attending trade shows and seminars and conferences. Nowadays, we'll do a lot of that virtually for the next little while. But by cooperating and participating in these different events, you can maintain credits. Otherwise, you have to re-challenge the exam again after 3 years. And I can tell you, having done it once, actually, that's a lie, having done it twice, because I failed the first time, you don't want to challenge that exam. You want to stay on top of your game and stay current by using the tools that the ISA provides you.
Nice. Yeah, much like the rope access industry there, you want to stay ahead of yourself. You want to stay current and be ready for your next recertification or reval, if whatever you call it. So, yeah, maintaining your professional development out there is extremely important. As a fire service worker, how does that pertain? So like you go and is it all in-house training for you where you're at, or are you having to do external training through and get your NFPA 1006 and, your pro board certification, or is it mostly in-house stuff?
Both, to be honest with you, and every fire department's different as well. That's very
Yeah.
important to recognize that you've not only got big municipal fire services like Calgary, Vancouver, Winnipeg, Toronto, Ottawa, Montreal, Quebec City, St. John's. You've got these really big municipal departments, but you've really got an awful lot of much smaller volunteer composite departments as well, and they all function a little bit differently. They try to work to NFPA. Typically, a lot of the provinces have had their own individual fire colleges, and they would in the past have run a lot of those programs and dictated a lot of those programs. But as you said, now the NFPA 1006 is really becoming the standard that everybody is working towards and trying to live up to, and has caused a little bit of confusion as fire departments work to get on board with that. And so often what a fire department will do is send their training division out for training. They'll come back and deliver that to suppression. Depending on the size and the budget of a fire department, they may send a rope rescue team for external training. More often than not, a new candidate that's looking to get on the fire service will go and take some courses privately in order to have them on their resume when they apply for a fire position as well. So the training is broad and varied. The other thing too that's important to note is based on SOP, standard operating procedures, or guidelines, that a fire department will be very strict about. You must function at a live call to the standard and the training that we have provided. They don't want what's known as a freelancer. They don't want anybody wandering off doing their own thing.
Yeah.
It has to be very structured in terms of incident command and how the rescue will take place.
Yeah, as it should be, right? When you start having your commander in your case, giving orders, you don't need somebody trying to think for them and changing the plan mid rescue. That'll just create tension and confusion.
Absolutely. I always refer to it as the 3 o'clock in the morning rescue when it's dark and everything looks the same. You've got a big pile of spaghetti on the ground and your heart's beating at an incredibly rapid rate in an adrenaline charged environment. That's when you want to be robotic and very systematic about how that rescue is going to go. Now, having said that, there has to be some room for flexibility because situations change. You never know what you're going to get halfway down an embankment or on a construction site or whatever the case may be. But by following that very strict set of guidelines, it allows you to stay on course with some room for flexibility.
Absolutely. So what are some of the biggest changes that you've encountered in these industries over your time being, certified or part of these organizations? So what are some of the biggest changes you've encountered as a firefighter, some of the biggest changes you've encountered as an arborist, and just, even dive into some of the changes you've encountered, with your time with Petzl?
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll start with the fire service. There's an old saying in the fire service, 200 years of tradition unimpeded by progress. And while some may take offense to that, there's two things that firefighters hate: the way things are and change. And with that in mind, it becomes a bit of a difficult process sometimes to introduce new gear. Having said that, though, that like most industries, the labor inspectors and the people that are responsible for health and safety are looking for easier and easier ways. And so I would say right across the board with all industries that we're seeing more direction towards companies that have got engineered solutions. So that means that they've realized that there's a problem in an industry. They've gone to the drafting table, their R&D, they've developed a product, and they brought it to market and had it certified at the same time. So Ministry of Labor likes that, because now we're taking some human error out of the equation, that we're not as worried about knots. Not that knots aren't important. They're a basic fundamental skill set of everybody working in verticality. But if we can start to take knots out of the equation and put an engineered solution in there, then Ministry of Labor is much happier. And typically speaking, the worker's much happier as well, because they don't have to maintain such a high level of skill sets. They've got something they can clamp on the rope or something they can attach to their harness, and it makes life a lot easier. So in the fire service, we've seen this real trend from bar racks and a dedicated main line with a loose tandem Prusik belay or something along those lines, some sort of a belay that's a manned belay. Because we're using a bar rack, it's really great in one direction, relies heavily on friction, but not so good in the opposite direction, or if I have to make changes. And so now we're looking at release hitches and load transfer hitches, load transfer systems as well that are incorporated in there. Mm-hmm. So I would say from the fire service perspective, one of the biggest changes that I've seen is the introduction of tools like the 540 and then the ID, the MPD, and now we've got the Maestro and the clutch coming online. Really great streamlined systems that are making it a lot easier to, one, do switchovers from raises to lowers, which is really important, or hauls to lowers. And we don't have to worry about that interim radium release hitch or the load transfer system. So now all of a sudden I've taken a big complication out of there. We're getting where a lot of the technical rescue, especially based on NFPA, it's particularly technical rescue, reads a lot like the IRATA training syllabus for rescue as well. So my hat goes off to the folks that are writing these standards, because they're realizing there's alternatives out there that are tried and true, and IRATA and SPRAT would be one of those. So we're seeing pick-off rescues, for example, that are very much mirrored towards the SPRAT and IRATA style of pick-off, as one example.
Yeah, we've all.
The other thing we're seeing a lot of now. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I've talked to a couple firefighters, and it's interesting to, talk about that transition going from, ascending and descending ropes on Prusiks, because, it's what what NFPA says. NFPA doesn't dictate a method; it dictates a skill. So, the pickoffs are now being, as more people are being trained to SPRAT and IRATA that are also part of the fire service, those skills are, inadvertently blending into the fire service more and more every day. So, it's evolution. It's good.
Absolutely. And I would say that, so that kind of covers the fire service, where it's been and where it's moving to. Yeah. One of the big things, just I think it warrants stating in the fire service, is that we're seeing this new terminology come out, which is a two-tension system. So we've heard of parallel systems, mirror systems, and I think the best way to describe it, and the way Petzl describes it, is a two-tension rope system. Okay. And so what that means is that I'm not trying to have 50% on one rope and 50% on the other rope, because that's virtually impossible. I've got different actions in play, different people that are going to be monitoring those. And so to use such strict language as mirrored or parallel doesn't leave the flexibility for the fact that sometimes it's going to be 47% on one side, and another time it's going to be 57% on the opposite side. So it gives me the opportunity to move back and forth with. So the key point though is that I've got tension in both lines. Whereas
Yes.
in the past, we've had a relaxed belay line and a tension main line. In the event of a failure of the main line, everything would fall into this relaxed belay line and cause shock loading that was, now we understand, was very considerable and could cause a lot of damage to the rescue package, I'll call it, which could be a rescuer and a casualty, as well as the system, ropes, anchors, and connections. So
Yeah.
having that tension line means we're never getting that dynamic event happening, that it's always remaining as static as possible. So that, I think that's one of the other big changes we're hearing more and more about now, and a bit of a direction that we're heading into, but it's painful in some cases because people don't want to let go of the old ways. I think there's enough research and enough happening out there now that at the very least it's worth considering.
Yes, absolutely. And with the arborist industry, has there been a lot of change in that industry? Or, obviously they're still using a lot of prusik mining systems. They use single line, double line techniques. But, are they still, relatively the same? Obviously, we have an advancements of gear such as the zigzag and stuff. There's a lot of other pieces of equipment that I'm not fully aware of. So how's that being adapted into the industry over time?
Well, when I was climbing, we used to use hitches. So taut line hitch and a Blake's hitch. The
Mhm.
nice thing about arborist rope is it's a double braided rope, internal braided core rather, with a braided sheath. Very different from a Kernmantle rope, but because of the suppleness of that braid, it means that I can essentially tie a Blake's hitch, which is not all too unlike a prusik, or a
Yep.
taunt line, not all too unlike a prusik either, and they bite nicely into each other. Whereas typically we know prusiks to be a smaller diameter rope on a host rope, and that's what actually allows it to bite in and do the breaking.
Yeah.
So that really started to evolve with Swabish type connections with a pulley in order to maintain that and use that as a rope grab. And now we've got something that's sliding in two directions, but grabbing in the downward direction when we need it to, easily maintained by a hand that would help to release the barrel knot. And so I could flow with that. And then we saw the evolution into a lot of other types of devices like zigzags and rope wrench and rope runners. So arborists are becoming much more savvy in the way they climb up rope. I can tell you back in my day, I used a Blake hitch and a body thrust. And in order to get to the first crotch of a tree that I'm working in, especially if it was a high tree, a very tall tree that was a long way, by the time I got to my first point that I could actually tie into, I was usually pretty tired. And now, and as you know from the rope access world, we've seen single rope techniques where arborists are bicycling up the line using chest ascenders and knee ascenders and hand ascenders in combination that allow them to move very slick up the line. And I'm not sure if it was the rope access world that gave that to the arborist, or the arborist world that gave that to the rope access folks. But however that happened, it's been a beautiful thing, because now it means, ergonomically speaking, it doesn't take me a lot of effort to get to where I need to be. And when I do get there, I'm ready to work. I don't have to take 10 minutes. And that's a couple of things. That means better safety, better production as well. And typically, we're a lot happier and healthier as workers as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Learning the technique to climb like an arborist or vice versa definitely helps in the competition scheme of rope access. And, it's still something that I use all the time for myself. And for me, going from that method to the standard method of, single hand descender with the foot loop and standing up like, you're taught as a level 1 technician, man, that is very taxing on the body. When you go from one to the other and have some sort of quantifiable information of one technique to the other. Just it's very taxing the standard way. So
Absolutely. Again, to use another old cliche, and because I'm approaching these years, I feel comfortable saying that old saying, if I knew I was going to live this long, I'd have taken better care of myself. Um, a lot of the techniques that are available today really allow that ergonomic approach to work. And I think that's really important that, and I'll make a really broad sweeping statement here that in the fire service, it's a lot of A-type personalities. In the arborist world, it's very athletic. It's very, organic as well. In the construction world, sometimes it can be a little laissez-faire in terms of our safety equipment. But the good news is that right across the board, work equipment is making life easier for us. Work smarter, not harder. And so we're seeing a lot of that. And that's, if anything, I could say over the years, the evolution of equipment in terms of weight, support, speed and convenience, and safety being the overall heading there. That's been one of the biggest trends and changes that I've seen in my time doing this.
absolutely, and Petzl being at the forefront of that, of developing an item of equipment through R&D, trial testing, et cetera, and then trying to whittle away the weight as much as they possibly can while maintaining that massive safety factor.
Absolutely, and that's no easy task.
No.
As a manufacturer, I'm on the sales side of Petzl, and the folks in manufacturing are always quick to say, "You got it easy." It's really tough on the manufacturing side, and I understand where they're coming from. That I've had the opportunity as an invited guest to sit with CSA Z259 committee, and it's an interesting world in the standards world, and so a company like Petzl that's selling around the world and trying to come up with equipment that can meet all of the worldwide standards is very, very challenging. And it makes it difficult sometimes as a purchaser, as an end user, to understand why a company like Petzl does the things that they do. And if I could say anything to your audience, it would be patient with us because we really try hard to get it right. We rely heavily on the feedback of our end users. So your listeners, for the most part, that's our ear. That's who we really listen to and try to develop solutions for and improve our existing equipment. Now, I've said that, and I don't want you to get inundated or me to get inundated with emails and phone calls because it doesn't happen overnight. That our next season, our 2021 products have been developed a long time ago, and they'll be introduced to market in the new year, but it took us a long time to get there. And so some of those changes can happen quickly as they need to, but for the most part, we're trying to understand what the marketplace wants and needs with feedback from them.
That is a good transition into our next kind of topic here. Next kind of question is, you've been lucky enough to work with Petzl kind of all over the world, and you've had the opportunity to work alongside CSA, obviously, like you mentioned there with Z259. What kind of changes can Canadians expect from Petzl in the coming years? Obviously nothing happens overnight, so we're all aware. Is there going to be more CSA approved gear in the future? Is this a conversation that's coming up? Because currently right now, we do not have a lot of gear that is CSA approved. I would say that there's more probably ANSI certified gear than there is CSA approved gear. So what's your take on this, and what can Canadians expect?
Absolutely. So first thing to keep in mind is we're a European-based company. European legislation towards certifications is a lot different than it is in other places around the world. I would say that CSA is probably one of the most difficult, one of the highest standards. And for us as Canadians, that's awesome because it means that if you buy something that has a CSA certification, that you're getting a product that meets a standard. And with Christmas not too far around the corner, I like to use the example of I go down to my local store where everything costs $1. And I don't mean to pick on them, but I go and buy a extension cord to plug in my Christmas tree. And the next thing you know, my Christmas tree is on fire because I didn't have a rated or standardized extension cord. And so that's something that, you know, when you're getting a certified product, that you're getting something that you can, in our case, put your life in. That makes it very easy to make those decisions. With that being said, when I look at the North American market, the US by far and away has a population that any manufacturer looks at and says, there's where we're going to spend some time and money. Canada is a small player in that, even though we've got this amazing standard system that we work with, that we're still, by population, fairly small potatoes. I don't mean to say that in a way that I want to take away from any Canadians. That's not my point. My point is, Petzl's an education company, but at the end of the day, we need to sell some equipment, and it does become a dollars and cents type of equation. So when I look at our harnesses, our helmets, those are two forms of PPE that a worker is putting on their person. That's an easy sell. So we've come up with our whole range of harnesses that are all CSA certified. We've got one helmet in our range that's a CSA certified helmet. And that's not necessarily a Petzl decision. Please keep in mind that that may be a certification issue, that we're trying to meet certifications that already exist and standards that already exist. So one example of that would be the Vertex helmet, and we've got the Vertex Event helmet. And a lot of people say, well, why isn't the Vertex Event CSA certified? Honestly, that has very little to do with Petzl and everything to do with CSA. They want a helmet to be dielectrically safe. So if it's got the holes in it preventing, electricity can pass through and it won't be dielectrically safe. So you can see the challenge that that might pose for a company like Petzl. We've got lanyards, we've got carabiners that are all CSA certified. But then when I start looking a little beyond that into ascenders, descenders, pulleys, mobile fall arresters like the ASAP, that we don't have CSA certifications on those. One of the big reasons is we just don't sell enough of them because the CSA certification process is very costly and takes a lot of time, honestly, to get through, and has recertifications as well. We've been able to work around that a little bit by having end users and agencies write variances to their policies that indicate that they've tested a piece of equipment and done their due diligence and it's appropriate for their application, and therefore they can use something that's non-CSA. We actually saw that with the helmets when they first came to the Canadian market. A number of organizations wrote a variance to be able to use that helmet because they found it to be the best. And then with that, Petzl said, let's spend money on certification. Things like the ID, for example, or the ascender and the pulleys, there isn't necessarily a CSA certification relating directly to those. So we go to the next, and most labor inspectors will go to the next highest standard. In our case would be NFPA. So we have both NFPA G, general use, and NFPA T, technical use on our equipment. So what that means is, you know, you can use them for life safety. From a rigging perspective, I'm not going to start dropping, if I'm an arborist, big pieces of wood onto an aluminum pulley. That just doesn't make sense. And it's not a pulley that's intended for that kind of rigging. It's intended for life safety, and that's something to keep in mind. Doesn't mean it couldn't be, but I sure wouldn't want to bet my bottom dollar on it. But I know I can be very secure in using that for life safety. We've got some things, and I'll show this, and for those of you that can see it, this is the Petzl Zigzag. So it's a arborist specific device. It has this link, these chains on it, which is a mechanical prusik. It has a pulley built in here. We also have one with a swivel. And so you've got all these different devices incorporated into one piece. I sort of refer to this as the platypus of the Petzl lineup because it has so many different things that it does, and a very difficult thing to get a certification on. So that's where somebody would have to look at what's the best purpose for this and write a variance in their policies and procedures that would allow for that.
Right.
As with the IDs, they've got NFPA certifications.
Hmm.
I know you wanted to talk a little bit about the ASAPs, so I'll let you ask that question, and then I'll answer your question.
Excellent. So what's happening with the ASAP? Is the ASAP going to get CSA approved? Obviously, here in Canada, we do recognize the EN 355 standard, which corresponds to the absorber axis energy absorber. There's also CSA approved carabiners, but you can use standard aluminum carabiners. But to meet the ANSI requirement, you have to include the captive. But yet still the ASAP device itself, the ASAP lock in most cases, most commonly used now, still doesn't adhere to any of those. It's not ANSI certified, it's not CSA certified. But where does that fit into the future of rope access here in Canada, as it is a mobile fall arrest device used on a Kermantle rope for the purpose of life safety?
Right. I'm so glad you asked. So the ASAP is an interesting device. A little bit of background history that we realized that the rope access industry particularly was using the shunt, and many of you will be familiar with this statement. There was the realization that the shunt could be overridden in a panic occasion, and
Mm-hmm.
so we started moving towards the idea that we had to ensure that the shunt wasn't being used as a backup device because it could be overridden. And so went to the engineers and said, we need some sort of device that moves up and down the rope. If there's a failure in the main line, this will catch the worker on a backup line. The engineers said, when do you need that for? We said, we need it ASAP. And boom, a device was born with the name ASAP. And so with that in mind, we've got a device now that is actually working really well outside of the rope access industry. That we've got a device that, and I respect the experience and the expertise of the rope access industry and the rope access worker, but we've got a device that's being looked at and used in some cases by roofers, by tower workers, by the fire industry. It's used as an unmanned belay on a system. So we've got a lot of other opportunities we're seeing the device used, and it may very well be in the hands of people who are less experienced than a rope access worker. And you know, if you're looking at an ASAP, it's got an up arrow and a little man pointing up, so it's pretty clear how that should get put on the rope. But there is the possibility that somebody could put it on the rope upside down. And if that's the case, obviously it's not going to grab or break in a falling situation. And because of that, it makes getting it CSA certified difficult.
Gotcha.
I don't want to speak for Petzl R&D at this point in time, but in Canada, that's sort of where we stand. Now, having said that, I did mention earlier, because I'm so familiar with Eastern Canada, that in Quebec, we have the CSST, which is their combination of Ministry of Labor and Workers' Compensation, and a very strict, very good regulatory body and inspection body that keeps Quebecers very safe. We have an incident where there happened to be a fatality, and a large organization in Quebec realized they needed some sort of a backup line. And when they looked at all the devices available out there, they settled on the ASAP. And because it was ANSI certified, and by the way, ANSI certified means that it's the device, the connectors, the rope, the setup, as dictated by Petzl, we're able to maintain that ANSI certification. If a worker deviates from that at all, it's no longer certified. So I just throw that out there as a caveat.
Perfect.
So now we've got an ANSI certified system being the key word, that's being used in Quebec by workers and doing very well in terms of a device that's simple and easy to use. And with proper training, everybody recognizes the up arrow on the little man with his finger pointing up so that you understand how it gets installed into the rope. They wrote a variance and now and proved it through engineering. And now that device is being used in Quebec. So is it impossible? No. It can be used, but you have to prove and do your due diligence that it's the correct device for your application.
Absolutely. And I know that for a time, anyways, correct me if I'm wrong here, the ASAP was coming out with yellow tabs to identify top and bottom as well, so you could see from afar. Is that still happening?
No, I haven't heard anything about that in terms of development at this point in time.
Okay. So yeah, well, that's awesome to hear that. Through an ANSI certified system, not necessarily an item of a specific item, but a system can be certified through ANSI, and there can be variances. Quebec has proven that this system can work, and maybe that will propagate through the rest of the provinces if there's any questions about the integrity of the system or the device itself.
Well, and I'll say this, and it's no easy task,
No.
but everybody who's listening, get involved. In Ontario, there's a new group that's coming on board for rope access in order to help to educate and really lobby for themselves and rope access in Ontario. We've had some great successes in British Columbia and Alberta in terms of writing policies in and equipment really into the labor laws out there that allow for rope access techniques to be used.
Mm-hmm.
So we've got a lot of opportunity, and the only way things are going to get changed is if we as end users get involved in that. So however you do that in your province or your local, wherever you happen to be from, if you want to see change, you've got to be that change. And you've got to get involved in order to make that change. Manufacturers can only do so much, and our responses are typically to market needs. We don't try to drive what the market needs. We try to come up with solutions for that market in as innovative way as we possibly can. And I think a lot of people have come to recognize that in Petzl is we're very innovative, and we're bringing something to market. It's because it's new, it's different, it's safer, it's lighter, it's better, it's stronger, whatever the case may be.
Absolutely. All right. So the next question here, this is more of a personal side of things here, and your involvement with the fire service in your area. Now, I don't know the systems that you're using at your fire department right now, but how is the fire service in your area adapting to the never-ending changes and advancements of equipment? Are they like a lot of other fire departments, dictated by, budgets? How are they? Are they still on, the old brake bars and Prusik system? Have they adapted and updated to which were the MPDs, or are we at the position now where they're using clutches and maestros? And from your perspective of being a Petzl rep, and they having that the access to you, how's that those advancements propagating through the fire service in your area? I don't know if that makes sense.
Well, yeah, it does. Particularly right now in these times of COVID, municipal budgets are very tight as governments are struggling to try and understand how to protect frontline workers, just finding and paying for PPE, maintaining services as best they possibly can. So it makes it a little more difficult for the fire department to be able to get their hands on some of that budget money. Typically, you've got to go to council. You may have your own budget that the chief is keeping pretty tight purse strings on. That being said, though, one of the things I'm recognizing is that because of NFPA 1006, that a lot of fire departments, at least in Ontario at the moment, that have never had programs and relied more on mutual aid systems, are actually starting to get involved in their own rope rescue and high angle rescue programs. And so there's a budget that's been set out specifically for those purposes. There's everything seems to have a life cycle. At Petzl, we always say that our textiles are good for 10 years and work backwards. And our hard products have an unlimited life so long as they pass the annual inspections or haven't seen a significant event, exposures, so forth and so on. And so with that in mind, stuff does wear out. So I see a lot of bar racks that have been put aside just because of the complication of them. Now, having said that, a bar rack is a beautiful thing. It's simple. It has very large tolerances. If you've got a dirty, icy rope running through it, it'll withstand that, where a lot of the new devices have very close tolerances and dirty rope doesn't go well through them. So a bar rack still has a place, but the skill set required is very high for that as well. So we talk about in the fire service 3 levels of competence. We have the technician at the highest level, we have operations sort of mid-level, and we have awareness at the lowest level, meaning that I recognize the problem, I need to call for help and know what my resources are. Operations is going to do some hands-on under the direction of the technical level that are actually going to set things up and get the work done with the sort of the bull force of the other 2. So with that in mind, we end up with a lot of departments nowadays that are moving away from those complicated systems and moving more towards these systems that are really set up for simplicity. Where at the technical level, I've got high skill sets, so I can do the quick math, but I can put somebody who's not familiar with a device and say, here's how it works. Obviously, we've pre-trained this, but here's how it works. And in those moments of high adrenaline, they can work a device like an ID, like a Maestro, with competence.
Absolutely.
So I guess that being said, every fire service must know their area. This is all part of training. Get out and do area familiarization, identify the places where you're going to have construction, window washers, embankments, all of the sort of features, man-made and natural, that you may have to perform a rescue from, and ensure that you've got the equipment and training to actually partake in that rescue and have it come out with a successful ending.
Absolutely. All right, great. So I don't know if this is a question completely off the cuff here, and we'll see where it goes. So, one thing that I see quite frequently, and you can answer this however you wish, from whatever perspective, but one thing I see a lot, the joys of social media and everyone's best friend, is the use of Tyrolean highlines and the emphasis on Tyrolean highlines. What's your take on the use of Tyrolean highlines from, even a manufacturer standpoint, but also an instructor standpoint, and an active fire service technician? Because for me, I don't see value in the Tyrolean highline as much as you would see with, cross halls and more dynamic systems. Yet the downfall with Tyrolean highlines is you're introducing a massive amount of unnecessary stress on a system to achieve the same thing as what a potential cross haul could achieve. Now, don't get me wrong, not every situation is, we're not talking every situation, but you do see a lot of cases where people just resort to rig tension lines, rig Tyrolean highlines, whichever one you want to call them. And this is like the go-to kind of conversation, the go-to aspect. Yeah. What have you seen? Like, you obviously been around both as a fire service member, as well an instructor and a Petzl rep. So completely off the cuff, don't know where this is going, but just thought I'd throw that out there.
It's actually a great question, and you're right. It really consumes a lot of conversations and a lot of social media posts. And so I'll come at it just purely from my opinion and observation. And let's start off by saying that in all my years of doing high angle rescue, high angle work, I've never seen a Tyrolean be used. I've seen, and in fact was involved in a rescue on a high line, a steel cable, but we were able to use the steel cable. So we didn't have to set that up. And I can tell you from that experience that had we tried to set up a Highline, it probably wouldn't have ended well, because it was in a natural area. Just the physical nature of where we're working to set up a Tyrolean would have taken us hours, and the patient didn't have hours. And so that's a consideration right off the top. It's while it's in many social media posts, it's played out to be a fairly simple process, a fairly simple system. I would say that's under ideal conditions. And in high adrenaline moments, they're very rarely ideal conditions. If you were to take a technician level high angle rescue course, it would almost always culminate on the last day with the building of a Tyrolean. And it's not because you need the skills of a Tyrolean, but rather everything you learned in the week prior to doing that all come together when you build a Tyrolean. So you get an idea of the forces, you get an idea of how systems move, casualty care, and how to move a casualty up and down, as well as the rescuer. So Highlines, they do play a part rather in the rescue service, if you will. I would suggest that out in the mountains, they may be a little more applicable than they would be in an urban setting or in the flatlands here of Eastern Canada. But that's not to say that you couldn't use one. There's a lot of considerations. And as a technician, I would say one of my first considerations would be time, especially as it relates to the casualty, and manpower and equipment resources that I have available there. And how many people in terms of that resource base have the knowledge that a incident commander could bark orders and have that just happen without any explanation. And I think that's part of the problem. Now, having said all of that, in my environment and where I work out of here in Southern Ontario, that we see more and more emphasis on the new tripods. So we've got tripods that can be tripods, bipods, monopods, gin poles, and the developing an expertise in a really good tripod system or any variation of that, I think is a much more important skill than worrying about Tyroleans. Don't get me wrong, Tyroleans are a really great thing. They're a lot of fun to build. They're a lot of fun to work with. But I think more emphasis on the skills of using a tripod properly will serve a fire department much greater than worrying about Tyroleans. If you've got time, manpower, and equipment, by all means, have at it. But again, that's just my opinion and based on my experience and what I've seen.
Absolutely. From a rope access standpoint, and instructor standpoint specifically, when you go into your level 3 evaluation and you're going to do a team exercise and you want to literally move one person to one side of the facility to the other side, it's very interesting to see, especially here in Alberta, people all just throw up tension lines, but have to keep in mind that tension lines are a 2-dimensional resource, where a cross-haul can be a 3-dimensional resource, and a lot more easy. It's a lot easier to introduce additional deviations from the system or the flight path, if you will, through a cross-haul setup than a Tyrolean setup or a tension line setup. But it's something that people automatically just resort to. So that's definitely something, obviously the fire service, I see a lot of posts about, Tyroleans all the time, talking about different systems and belay devices and dual line, double line, this, that, and whatever else. And it goes back to my podcast about rope access specifically is not rocket science, right? Sometimes the easiest way and the best way is the correct way, instead of getting all complicated and convoluted with, the manpower resources, the equipment resources and stuff like that. You can use less gear and achieve the same goal. And with less people, why wouldn't you?
Right. And I don't want to I want to be really clear. I don't want to downplay Tyroleans. I don't want
No.
to downplay those Highlines, because the skill sets that you'll take away from building one of those are very plastic and very adaptable to all the other systems you're going to do. And one thing a Tyrolean does is it really teaches people about the forces that are at play. And I think it's a valuable training tool from that standpoint. Real world applications are going to depend entirely on having done a, uh, a pre-call or a site inspection where you feel you may use something like that. And I'll relate that a little bit to the arborist world as well. That we didn't call them Tyroleans or Highlines, we called them speed lines, because I would tie off a rope up in a tree and it would go down to the back of my chipper, and I'd be flying brush down out of the tree over tops of houses if I had a backyard tree that I had to do in order to get to just help to save labor.
Yeah.
Nowadays, what you're seeing more and more of are crane operations. So the job is priced based on having a crane there. A really skilled crane operator can come, an arborist will tie off the top of the tree to the crane. He'll make a cut and the crane will just lift the piece up and out of the way. And now the safety margins are much better. The convenience and speed of that operation is much better as well. And so some of the things we even did, and a lot of arborists still do, but you'll see more and more crane operations these days in the arboricultural world than you did, say, 10 years ago. And I think that's that same thing. It's a speed line is a very dynamic system. It's a dynamic event. You have to know it well and you have to trust it and understand the forces that are at play there, because the wrong piece of wood vectors a rope and all of a sudden you've got pulls coming from two angles that you may not have anticipated.
Yeah. And something I talk about is, speed is safety, time exposure, right? So the time that it's going to be to, attach that tree top to a crane and fly it out is substantially less time exposure in the tree cutting, moving equipment than it is like what you were talking about, setting up that line and sending it down little bit by little bit. That could take 12 hours, where having a crane in there, you're up in the tree for an hour or 2 hours. So that time exposure in that environment is a huge, huge thing that we also have to look at.
Exactly right. Yeah. And, in the fire service too, we talk about low frequency, high risk events. And I would say a Tyrolean is definitely one of those low frequency, high risk. And because it's not trained on a regular basis, at least not in the fire services that I see around me and that I've had the opportunity to go into, if all of a sudden you decided to tie a Tyrolean off the cuff, I just think it opens up the door to a lot of failure.
Absolutely. Cool. All right. Well, thank you very much. That's what I have for today. Is there anything you would like to add?
No, other than just a couple of things. So
that's
where you go for information. Petzl.
Petzl.com.
Our website is great. It's very interesting. What's that?
Petzl.com. For the listeners out there, he showed a little pamphlet or a little sign there that said Petzl.com. So make sure to go to Petzl.com.
So for our end users out there, you're the people that we really want to listen to. Whether you give the information to your dealers where you buy your equipment, send that information directly to Petzl, whether it's questions, comments, or smart remarks, we want all of it, because your feedback is how we progress. It's how we develop gear. And just be patient with us. Not everything's going to happen overnight, but we're definitely listening to you and we're definitely trying to respond to your needs, keeping in mind that we're responding to the needs of a worldwide audience as well. So we're trying to make something that will work just as well in Japan, Russia, South Africa, Canada, South America. That as a manufacturer is what helps to keep us in business, and it helps us to get a wide audience that we can continue making solutions for.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much. So for the people out there that are looking to get in contact with you, is that possible? Can people reach out to you, and how would they be able to do so?
Yeah, absolutely. You can get in touch with me through Petzl. I'm also available at ineve, the number 4, Petzl at gmail.com. So ineve for Petzl at gmail.com.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity, Mikey. This has been a lot of fun.
Excellent. Well, thank you for your time, and I'll chat with you later on.
Sounds good.
All right, well, thank you very much for tuning into today's episode. I hope you enjoyed it. I always enjoy sitting down and having a good conversation with Ian. Ian has been a great resource for me over the years as I've worked with him on a sales representative side as well. I've worked with him as a liaison between our rope access competition team and Petzl as we've traveled all over the world. So if you liked this video or this episode, please make sure to hit the like button, comment down below, and let me know what other manufacturers you'd like me to talk to. If you're watching this on YouTube and you haven't already, make sure to subscribe, follow us wherever you get your podcasts, and I'll see you on the next one.